I'm glad to see you all. We've got a few more people trickling in, I believe, but really excited to kick off boot camp with you all. I'm going to turn it over to Alex Bendler to welcome us all and get started.
Hi, everybody. This is Alex. I'm the ED of CACSA, and I'm actually not the host of this. Our friends at WestEd will be putting on the boot camp for us, and I'm here to be a bit of a resource and to help when I can. We surveyed authorizers a couple of years ago, and one of the main things people asked for was an in-depth training for new authorizers. So we're really proud to put this on, and I'm excited to do it for you. And I know we've got some new people who haven't been involved too much with CACSA in the past, and I just want to let you know that we are available for you one-on-one and when we meet regularly as a community, and we're excited to do this. I just want to say a big thanks to the team at WestEd for all their work in putting this together and for making it so Colorado specific. So I hope it works for you, and we look forward to getting as much feedback as we can. We plan to continue doing this in the future, and as our guinea pigs / piloting team, your feedback will be really helpful to us as we move forward. So with that, I think I'll actually turn it over to WestEd.
Thanks, Alex. Good afternoon and welcome to the first day of CACSA Bootcamp, everybody. I'm Robin Chait. I'm with WestEd and I'm the project director for this project. And we're going to go ahead and introduce ourselves, and I'll start. At WestEd, my primary responsibility is leading WestEd's partnership on the National Charter School Resource Center, which is an initiative of the U.S. Department of Education, which is managed by Manhattan Strategy Group in partnership with WestEd. And I also develop tools and resources and provide technical assistance to charter authorizers, state departments of education, and others. And before WestEd, I worked at a charter network in Washington, D.C. as their director of policy development and communications. And I've also worked at DC's state education agency and a think tank. And I will go ahead and let the rest of the team introduce themselves, starting with Kelly.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kelly Weinveen. Nice to see some familiar faces and some new faces as well. I'm with WestEd, previously was with the Colorado Department of Education, which is why I recognize a few faces. But I'm a program associate at WestEd. Like Robin, I work a lot on the National Charter School Resource Center, but then also have been doing a lot of work around disseminating authorizing best practices. So I'm really excited to meet you all and share some information today. I'll pass it over to my colleague Lauren to introduce herself.
Thanks, Kelly. Hi, everyone. So happy to see so many faces today. My name is Lauren Outlaw. I am a senior policy specialist at WestEd. I've been with the organization for about 3 years, and I too am on the school choice team supporting the National Charter School Resource Center and also our work on high quality authorizing practices. I'm also on the strategic resource planning and allocation team, where I do a lot of project management around state education funding projects and other strategic planning projects with states and districts. Before joining WestEd, I was the director of policy for KIP DC here in Washington, DC for about 4 years. And that's it about me. And I'm really excited again to see everyone and looking forward to kicking us off. I'll pass it over to Steve.
Hello, Steve Canavero, and I direct the work, school choice work at WestEd. So oversee all of our good work in this space. I've been at WestEd for approximately 2 years, and prior to that, served as a state superintendent in my home state of Nevada, where I live and work out of my home office. And prior to that, I was a charter authorizer. So I kind of evolved from a new authorizer to maybe an experienced authorizer over the course of 5 years in Nevada, where we established a new independent chartering board that I oversaw and was the director of. And then prior to that, took over the responsibilities when Nevada Department of Education sponsored charter schools. So I've sort of been through some experiences there, and we're really excited about hosting this boot camp in partnership with CACSA and to support you as you kick off your work as an authorizer in Colorado. Kelly, back to you, I believe.
Great. And we also have Kathy on our team as well. Kathy, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Kathy Hunsaker. I'm with WestEd. I've been with WestEd for about 4.5 years. I'm an operations coordinator. I'm here to provide support today. So if you have any tech questions, please chat me and I'll see what I can do to help you out. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Kathy. So we've been working with CACSA since last January on a couple of projects. And some of you might have seen the renewal package that we worked with CACSA to develop. We've been working closely with Alex to develop this boot camp, and it provides an overview of Colorado statute and the Colorado standards and principles. And then we have some sessions on the primary phases of charter authorizing in Colorado. And so the boot camp doesn't provide every detail that a new authorizer needs, but the idea is that hopefully it provides a helpful overview for new authorizers and gives you some context and some resources to guide you. And then we also have a few more experienced authorizers who will be joining us each week to provide real life examples and context about how these practices are actually implemented in Colorado. So now I'm going to turn it over to Kelly to get us started and to talk through some of the logistics.
Great. Thanks, Robin. So before we get started, we're a pretty small group, so we hope that we can all get to know each other during this next 6 weeks of this boot camp. And just wanted to start off by doing some introductions so we can hear from you all. So if you wouldn't mind, I'll just kind of go in order of who I see on my screen. If you can just tell us your name, what district you're coming from, maybe about how many years you've been in the authorizing world or in your role. And then I know we've got some new folks, so it might be helpful to also just give us a ballpark number of about how many schools you have in your portfolio, because I know we've got some folks who might be authorizing a lot of schools and some with just a handful. So if you want to just take a 30 seconds or so to introduce yourself. Jane, you're the first one on my screen. Jane Cummings, would you mind starting us off?
Sure. Hi, my name is Jane Cummings. I am working in the iConnect zone in District 49 in Colorado Springs, and I'm really new to this position. I just started in the beginning of August, so I'm working with Andy Franco and Tina Vidovich, who's also here today. We have 9 charter schools in D49, and my main role is helping just support them operationally and with compliance and submissions and that sort of thing.
Great, thanks so much. And I've got another Jane Cummings, but I think that might be Tina actually, who's labeled as Jane. Tina, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, that's kind of weird. But yeah, that's me, Tina. I'll get that changed in a second. So this is my 6th year with the authoriser's office in D49, and my title is academic administrator, and really that is just providing support and services. Anything academic, anything instructional, anything student support, anything with integrated services, special education, PBIS, MTSS, 504s, ELD, as well as running leadership induction for charter leaders, things of that nature.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Tina. We're excited to draw on your experience. Catherine Elliott.
Hi, I'm Kathy Elliott, and I'm at Adams 12 School District. I'm the charter school liaison for special populations, and we have 4 schools that we work in the district, and I just started in August too, so I'm brand new to all of this, and I'm very excited to be here. So
Great. Thanks so much for joining us. Ken Lynn, you're next on my screen.
Hi, I'm Kinlan Newman. I'd like to apologize if you can hear my dogs barking in the background. Sorry for that. I am the charter school liaison for School District 27J. We currently have 7 schools that are operating, another one on its way next year and 1 in review. This is my 2nd year as the charter school liaison, among other duties that I have. I also sit on the CACSA board, happily so.
Great. Thanks for joining us. Christina, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, I'm Christina Castro. I work on the DPS portfolio team as an operations manager, and this is my 1st year.
Great. Katie, husbands.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Kelly. It's nice to see you. I'm actually took over Kelly's position at the Department of Education here in Colorado as a senior field consultant for charter schools. So I'm actually here to learn from all of you, and that's it.
Great, nice to meet you. Jody, you're next on my screen.
Everyone, I'm Jody Mattingly. I am a school improvement manager on the portfolio team with Denver Public Schools. We have over, 60-ish charter schools. Kelsey, keep me honest on that one. We are excited to be joining and learning a lot more of the nuts and bolts of authorizing. Christina, myself, and Stacy Wojak, who's also on this call, are all part of the operational and academic support team for our charters. So it's really great for us to build our knowledge and ability to support by digging into a lot of the nuts and bolts of authorizing and accountability. So happy to be here. And I do want to say I will be turning my camera off throughout. Doesn't mean I'm not engaged, Alex, I promise. Just means that I'm probably going to be eating lunch here and there.
Not a problem. Kelsey?
Hi, everyone. My name is Kelsey Leachko. I am a program specialist of accountability for the portfolio management team with Denver Public Schools. And I just started about 2 months ago. So this is all new to me and I'm looking forward to learning a lot.
Great, happy to have you. And Stacy?
Hi, I'm Stacy Wojak Goodman. I am one of the operations managers along with Christina for the portfolio management team at Denver Public Schools. I previously worked in charter school in the universe of charter schools in Philadelphia as the operations manager and oversaw about 87 charter schools at that time with about 110,000 children. So it's just interesting to acclimate myself to, Colorado versus Philadelphia, which was a while ago. So I did that for 5 years. It's been about 8 years in between, and I got back into DPS with the charter schools because I adore charter schools. I think they're amazing and great options. So I look forward to learning more and digging into the authorizing in Colorado.
Thanks, Stacy. And Michael.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michael Everest. I'm the CFO for the Johnstown-Milliken School District in Weld County. I'm in my second year in this position, and so kind of in my second year of dealing with charter schools. My district has 2 charter schools currently. We have one that's been in the district for between 15 to 20 years, so a long time. And we have one that is just starting up. So it's been very exciting, and I'm hoping to learn. I wish we would have had this about a year ago, but better late than never. So looking to just kind of fill in the gaps in my knowledge of charter schools.
Absolutely. And did I miss anybody else that I didn't catch? Great. Well, feel free to interrupt if need be. But we're really excited to welcome you all here today, regardless of how much experience you've had in Colorado or in the authorizing world. We did this boot camp with Florida previously and just found that regardless of the number of years you've been in the role, it was just a really great experience to not only hear from one another, but also kind of go back to the basics of what does it mean to be a charter authorizer. So feel free to utilize the chat at any point, but you can also just take yourself off mute if you have questions or comments throughout today. Here's our agenda for the next couple hours that we have together. We're spreading out this boot camp over 6 weeks, so we hope to see you next Wednesday. But for today's agenda, what we're going to cover are 3 sessions. And we're going to start with kind of the basics of Colorado charter law and statutory requirements. So it's going to kind of feel like drinking from the fire hose of all things statute. Well, we've built in a little bit of a break, so if you need to heat up your lunch and things like that, hopefully that gives you a little bit of time to do so. And then the next session we'll talk about is the importance of setting a mission and vision for authorizing work. Then we'll round out today for the last half hour by looking at the Colorado principles and standards for charter authorizing. Robin's going to drop a link in the chat to a Google folder that will have all of the materials for today. So you'll have copies of all of these slide decks in the PDF form. And then we also have some handouts, a glossary of terms and some other materials that we'll reference today, but know that you'll have access to all of those in that Google folder. And so we're going to get started then with our first session on Colorado charter law and statutory requirements. We saw in your registration, this is a hot topic. So by all means, like I said, if you have questions that come up, feel free to unmute yourself or drop those questions in the chat. We're all Zoom experts by now. We've been doing this forever, but just as a reminder, if you're not talking, if you wouldn't mind just keeping yourself on mute in case of children, dogs, everything else in the background. Like I said, absolutely utilize that chat box for any questions or comments. We have a limited amount of time, so if we don't get to your questions, then we'll try our best to answer them all in the moment. But if not, then we will note them and make sure CACSA can follow up on your questions that we don't get to. And then finally, we'll have a survey at the end of the day. Because this is spread out over 6 weeks, we want to make sure we're meeting your needs. It's only 3 questions. So at the end of the day today, if you wouldn't mind just taking a minute to leave your feedback so we can incorporate that to bootcamp next week. We're going to cover a lot of information today. Robin kind of said at the top, it's not going to be everything, but we are going to go through a lot of information, and we really hope that you're an active participant in bootcamp. You'll see some of these icons on the slides where we might have ways for you to engage through a poll or a chat question. And then we will have a couple breakout rooms today too, just to prep you in advance. Please stay on the call. But just really want to make sure that you're ready to engage in this content, because I think you'll take more out of it the more engaged you are today. We encourage you to keep your cameras on if you can, but if you're eating lunch, that's also totally fine. So we're going to dive in. So for our first session today, here are kind of the main topics we're going to cover. We're going to start by looking at the history of charters in Colorado, and then we'll really dive into focusing on the Colorado charter law. After that, we'll take a look at the state accountability system and then touch on some other federal and state laws that apply to authorizing as well. Our objectives, like we said, this is intended to be a brief review to help you deepen your understanding of charter law. And we hope that you walk away understanding where to go back to in statute when you're referencing decision-making or other areas of authorizing. So let's start by just talking about the history of Colorado charters. So the first kind of main date that really pops up is 1988, and that is kind of credited as the year when the idea model for charter schools was first created. So there was a man, Albert Shanker. He was an education reformer and the president of the American Federation of Teachers. And he's kind of credited for coming up with this idea that he called a charter school, which would allow teachers to experiment with new approaches to learning. So only a few years later then, in 1991, is when the first charter law was passed in the nation, and that happened in Minnesota. They were the first state in the nation to pass charter law. And from there, many states moved in the same direction, including Colorado, not too far behind. And so 1993, June 3rd to be exact, was the date when the Colorado State General Assembly approved the Charter School Act. And the law in Colorado, it's intended in part to create schools with high rigorous standards for student performance, to improve student learning, to increase learning opportunities for all pupils. And there's a special emphasis on expanded learning experiences for pupils who are identified as academically low achieving, and to encourage diverse approaches to learning and education. That's remained true since 1993. That is the intent of the Colorado Charter Schools Act. Another big date then that pops up is 2004. And that is when the legislature created the Colorado Charter School Institute, which I'm sure you hear as CSI. And that was created to provide an alternative mode of authorizing for charter schools as a mean to assist school districts in utilizing best practices for charter schools, and to approve and oversee charter schools in school districts that are not desiring to do so themselves. So as part of that revision, school districts were also allowed something called exclusive chartering authority, which we'll talk about a little bit later in bootcamp. But that basically means that any charter school seeking to operate in a school district needs to first apply to that school district for consideration. Again, we'll talk more about that topic a bit more, but in general, the majority of charter schools are authorized by a district. Currently, CSI authorizes 42 charter schools of about 260 that are in existence. And then we look at 2009, that's another big date that came up. This isn't charter specific necessarily, but the Educational Accountability Act of 2009 authorized the Colorado Department of Education to conduct annual performance reviews of all public schools, and that included charter schools as well. So this is when the creation of improvement plans came about and accreditation categories for districts. And with that also came the Unified Improvement Planning Systems, or the UIP system. And again, we'll talk more about that today in this session. And since then, there's been many pieces of legislation that have passed that have impacted charter schools. Some of those include the READ Act and updates to the READ Act, which is focused on accelerating the number of children reading at grade level by the end of third grade. The BEST Grant Program was created to provide funding for construction and renovation of facilities. And then there was also legislation that passed regarding full day kindergarten. So again, this is not everything, but just some major dates when we look at the history of charter schools in Colorado. We also just wanted to ground us in some data. So this is first just a look at the growth of charter schools in Colorado from 1993, when the Colorado Charter Schools Act was passed, up until 2019. So if we look at this, and this is pulled from CDE's triennial report in 2019, but just anything you notice about the growth of charter schools, does anything surprise you? Or is this kind of what you anticipated? Feel free to either drop your answers in the chat or just unmute yourself. Any thoughts on the growth of charter schools in Colorado? Great, yeah, Tina said steady increase.
It does seem to be a steady increase, and then it looks as if the past few years it's actually leveled off a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jody. Consistent increase, yeah. And that's, in general, that's great that we've seen that increase. And it will be interesting to go past that 2018-2019 school year, like Jody said. It also could be helpful just to kind of compare Colorado to other states in the nation when it comes to the total enrollment of students in the charter sector. So this is based on 2017 enrollment data, where you can see Colorado has roughly 13% of the total student population enrolled in public charter schools, which does put it at the higher end compared to other states. As of 2019, like I said, this graph is from 2017, but in 2019, the rate of students in charter schools in Colorado was 13.5% based on that triennial report. So again, if you look at Colorado compared to other states, is there anything that stands out to you looking at the enrollment of Colorado compared to other states nationwide?
I think it's just interesting. There seems to be a pretty heavy concentration of enrollment in Western states and in a couple states in the South. And just curious about the Louisiana number. And I don't know if that's because this data was gathered a little bit prehistorically, I guess, of the shift to charters.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can see California, Arizona, Utah, Colorado, Florida, Louisiana. I do think Louisiana, so I began teaching in my career in New Orleans, and I would assume that number is higher, largely because of the city of New Orleans too. And Tina, I see your question is DC 45%.
That is correct. It's actually probably a little bit higher now.
Absolutely. Great. Also just wanted to ground us to look a little bit more specifically at enrollment of certain student populations in Colorado. And so it's interesting to look, this is the enrollment of students in the charter sector in Colorado based on racial and ethnic minority enrollment. So this graph here, the blue line is the charter sector, and you can see here that we've increased the percentage of racial and ethnic minorities from 2010 to 2019, even more so than the traditional public sector. Again, this data is from the triennial report from CDE, which comes out every 3 years. We can also take a look at the enrollment of students with disabilities in the charter sector. So again, the blue line here is the charter sector, and it's comparing traditional public schools to the charter sector. So in 2010, charters enrolled about 6.4% of students identified with disabilities, compared to 7.2% in 2019. So this is slightly lower increase compared to non-charters, who have gone from enrolling 9.8% of students with disabilities in 2010 to 11.9% in 2019. And I'm sure that you've heard a lot of conversation around this, but this gap in Colorado between the enrollment of students with disabilities in charters is the lowest in the nation. And the gap between traditional public schools and charters is among the bottom 3 biggest gaps in the nation. I know this is something CACSA has been working a lot on, and I'm sure you'll hear even more about the work going on regarding this topic that CACSA is involved in. And then finally, this just shows the academic performance of charter schools in Colorado, and this is based on the state's school performance framework. So this is from 2018, where it shows about 72% of all charter schools earned the highest ranking on the school performance framework, which is performance. And about 4% of charters were in that bottom bracket of the SPF, which is called turnaround. Compared to, if you look at this data and you're wondering what all schools in Colorado look like in the same year in 2018, 2019, if you look at all schools, 69% of all schools earned that highest performance rating of performance. And again, this is from that triennial report. So we're going to go through a lot of terms. I'm already catching myself accidentally using acronyms instead of telling you what they mean. So these are just a few that we're going to use the acronym for: CDE, CSI, SPF, but there's a lot when it comes to the authorizing world. So we do have a full list of some terms and acronyms that we'll use throughout boot camp. It's in a handout, and Robin's going to drop that link in the chat right now too. But by all means, if we're using acronyms or words and you're like, what are you talking about? Please interrupt or drop a question in the chat so we can slow down and make sure we're all on the same page. So within this section, like I said, we're going to now really focus in on the statute in Colorado that impacts authorizing work. So for each of these main topics covered, we're going to go into more detail on that topic later in boot camp. But for now, let's just look at what's in the Colorado Charter Schools Act. So before we dive into the statute, we're going to start by just looking at a few questions to see what you already know about Colorado charter law. This is anonymous. It's not an actual graded quiz, but we'll revisit these same questions again at the end of boot camp, and we'll reveal all the answers. So Kathy's going to launch a quick poll and just to answer 3 quick questions. And again, we won't know your answers, so it's okay if you don't get them right. But question 1, true or false? Do you believe there's a cap on the number of charter schools allowed to open in the state of Colorado? Is that true or false? Question 2, districts in Colorado never allow a charter applicant to apply to CSI, the Colorado Charter School Institute, when they have exclusive chartering authority. True or false? And finally, charter schools in Colorado are funded in the same manner as traditional public schools. True or false? We'll leave it open for a couple more seconds. Take your best guess, and then we'll look back at these answers at the end of the session to see if you change your mind. Great. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Lauren then to get us started on walking us through the Colorado Charter Schools Act.
Great, thanks so much, Kelly. So as Kelly noted, we're going to walk through Colorado's Charter School Act next, which is located in Colorado Statute, Article 30.5 of Title 22. And so this is the law that authorized the creation of charter schools within Colorado, but it also contains a lot of detailed information for authorizers to guide you in your work. And so the rest of the presentation will be organized by these relevant authorizing topics and the related Colorado statute. While this presentation can serve as a reference, by no means do we intend for you to memorize all of the statutory details that we are going to cover today. But as I mentioned, it can serve as a reference for you to look back to when you have questions in your work moving forward. So in Colorado, the purpose of charter schools is to improve high-performing schools that will specifically, serve students who have been identified as academically low achieving. The intent of the law, as defined in statute, is that charter schools should encourage diverse approaches to learning and be incubators and trying new and innovative ideas in education. As Kelly noted earlier, the stated purpose, again, in Colorado statute for charter schools is to promote the longitudinal analysis of student progress, to create new employment options, to provide parents and students with expanded choice, and to hold charter schools accountable for performance. So in addition to the legal requirements that we'll continue discussing in this session, we'll also review and talk through some best practices for authorizing charter schools in Colorado. And in Colorado, districts and the Charter School Institute, or CSI, are the two groups, if you will, that authorize charter schools as permitted under the law. And so we'll talk a little bit more later in the session about why a district or school would want to be authorized by CSI. But for right now, we're going to focus on the legal requirements for district authorizers. And as we move forward throughout the presentation, we'll continue to point out some of the differences when it comes to authorizing as either CSI or as a district. And we'll also refer to many of CSI's materials, as they're one of the biggest models for what it means to be a high quality authorizer in Colorado. So the first big topic that we're going to cover is the charter school application process. So the Colorado statute includes a list of information that must be included in the charter school application for every district or state authorizer. These items include things like providing the school's mission and vision, the goals around student academic performance, a description of the school's academic program and operational plan, in addition to plans for community involvement. There's also a requirement that schools speak to their plans for how they will serve students with special education needs. CACSA has created a model application based on these requirements, which we will look at in further detail in a future bootcamp session. The law also states, includes information on the application submission process. And in general, the law provides a timeline, the law states that a timeline must be established by the authorizer, and states that the deadline for applications has to be sometime between August 1st and October 1st. Once the application is received, authorizers then have 15 days to review the application to see if it meets the minimum requirements that are included in the law. If any application is missing details or certain information, applicants also under the law have an additional 15 days to make corrections before their application is reviewed. The application then goes through a formal review process, which again, we'll talk about on the next slide. But after that formal review process, it goes to a final vote before the local district board. This vote has to happen within 90 days of the application being submitted, and an authorizer is not allowed to charge an application fee during this process. So next, we're going to launch another poll. Thanks so much, Kathy. So based on your knowledge, does your district have an 18-month waiver for the application process? No right or wrong answers here, just looking for your feedback.
Just to jump in, Lauren, so this is specific to that timeline that we stated. How the statute does state that the timeline for submission must be between August 1st and October 1st. but we know many districts have a waiver granted to have an application due date outside of that timeline. So if you're unsure what the 18-month waiver is, and that's what we're referring to there.
Thanks so much, Kelly.
If I can offer, I think the districts with more experience have really thought going to the 18th month timeline is preferable. And it's more smaller authorizers that haven't done very many of them that stick to the August, October deadline.
Thanks so much, Alex, for that feedback. And so it looks like we have a 75, 25% split between yes and no regarding that 18-month waiver.
Oh, may I offer one other observation too before you go on to the next slide? Sorry. A point of controversy has been whether that 15-day completeness period counts for the 90 days or not. So it's not settled. Some districts argue that that's not part of the 90, and some treat it like it is part of the 90 days. And you will find people who will argue both sides of it, and the charter schools have their own perspective. They'd like it to count, but not all districts do count it as part of the 90.
Great. Thank you, Alex, for that follow-up. So next we'll cover, as part of the application review process, what happens with denials and appeals. So what occurs during the 90-day review period? Under the law, authorizers must conduct a rigorous review of each application, and the law does include a list of minimum requirements for all applications, as we discussed, and we'll look further into in upcoming slides. However, there are no specific application criteria listed in the law. So within the review process, there's a requirement that all applications are reviewed by the District Accountability Committee, or DACs. This committee needs to be made up of at least one parent or guardian who has a child that attends a charter school, as well as an individual that has knowledge or background in charter schools. Many authorizers will also conduct an interview with each applicant before the hearing on approving or denying the application, which you will hear referenced as a capacity interview, although this is not a requirement under the law. So after the DAC reviews the application and the authorizer has formed a recommendation on that application, a public hearing must be held where a denial or approval decision is made. Any denial decision must be provided in writing to the applicant as required under the law. And if an application is approved, the next step in the process is creating the contract or the charter or charter agreement. The school's contract must be agreed upon no later than 90 days after the local board vote on the application. And in Colorado, the law does not cap charter school growth, meaning that an application cannot be denied based on the number of charters already in existence in the state. So next within this process, covering appeals, the statute provides specific timelines for the appeals process. If an application is denied, this information must be provided to the Colorado Department of Education within 15 days of the denial decision. Applicants then have the right to appeal any denial decision to the State Board of Education. So the next step in the process after an application is approved is the charter contract. As we stated, all approved applications must then have a contract that is completed and executed within 90 days of approval. The original application submitted to the authorizer must also be the basis for this contract. Under the law, a new contract must be for a term that is at least 4 years for district authorizers. The contract also includes a list of automatic waivers, and these are waivers to state statutory requirements, and they should include any additional waivers that will be requested to CDE as well. And so with that, I'm gonna turn it to Kathy for our second poll here in the charter application process. Is the following included as an automatic waiver to statute for charters in Colorado? And the reference here, it includes the statutory section. Give it a couple more seconds. Okay, so looks like we have 86% at yes and 14% at no. And the correct answer is yes. This is, I'm sorry, this is included as a waiver. So moving on, the next part of statutory requirements for charter authorizing is oversight responsibilities. So authorizers are legally required to annually review all of the charter schools within their portfolio and to provide feedback to the school based on this review. So what does this review look like? It must include information about the school's progress in meeting the objectives detailed in their charter contracts, as well as reviewing the school's most recent financial audit. Additionally, information that is gathered in these annual audits must also be used in the renewal process when the school's contract is up and they are undergoing the renewal process. There are additional oversight requirements if a charter is on the state's accountability clock, which we'll discuss again in additional detail in a subsequent session. But if a school has been identified by the state's accountability system as low performing, the school must present a summary of any changes they're making to improve student performance, as well as any progress made, and to present this to you as the authorizer. So the next topic that we'll cover sort of in sequence is the charter school renewal process. So as we've noted, initial charter contracts must be for a period of at least 4 years. The law also requires that a renewal application be submitted by a school no later than December 1st of the year before the year in which the charter will expire. Each authorizer must have a specific process for a renewal with deadlines that are established and shared with all of the schools in their portfolio. And when making renewal decisions, the annual reports that are conducted must be included as a part of the body of evidence used to assess what the decision to renew or non-renew a school. The law also states that the renewal application must include information to gather the progress the school has made in achieving, again, the goals and objectives that are stated in the charter contract, in addition to a financial statement or information that gives the authorizer enough detail to compare costs of the school to other organizations. Once all of this information is gathered, the chartering board then must rule on renewal decisions no later than February 1st of the year that the charter is set to expire. I know that I keep saying this, but we will cover the renewal process in additional detail in a subsequent section, but that's just a high-level overview. So continuing on to the next main topic in the law, non-renewal and termination. The law includes general grounds for non-renewal of a charter school contract. And these reasons include if the school has violated any conditions, standards, or procedures in the contract, if that school has failed to make adequate progress towards the goals or federal requirements, if the school has failed to meet any fiscal management standards, and if the school has violated any provision of the law, or if the school is on the state's accountability clock for a third year and has not made significant progress towards getting out of the state's accountability clock. If the contract is not renewed, the school has the right to appeal to the state board, similar to if their application was denied. Authorizers must have clear procedures in place for what happens when a school is closed. And this should include a plan for how students will enroll in another school after the charter school is closed. So our next topic is on district policy. And it's important to highlight that most districts in the state have specific district policy when it comes to authorizing charter schools. These policies should include all state and federal requirements, and they'll likely be your go-to documentation that you'll reference in your work moving forward. So in looking at the time, it seems that we don't have maybe time to jump into small groups. So I'm going to go ahead and pose a couple questions for quick discussion as a whole group. And I can post them in the chat as well. So how does your district policy impact your work? That's the first question that we intended to pose in breakout groups, but interested to get your feedback on that before we move forward. And then also, do you know if your district has an established policy document? And if not, why might such information or document be useful? And why would district policy be needed in addition to state statute? So feel free to come off mute to answer any of these questions. And also you can add your responses in the chat as well. Great, thanks, Kenlyn. So 27J has a district policy and it drives my work on the regular. Can you speak to or share details with the group on what the policy includes?
It's mostly around the process for application. There's a lot of information on the process for application. I think that's one of the biggest pieces in there, and renewal. It doesn't go into great detail on some of the other specifics, particularly around the annual reporting back to schools, which is, I think, a hole in our system that we have in 27J.
Great, thank you so much for that feedback. Does anyone else want to share on their district's policy or lack thereof, and how it either is helpful, or maybe if you wish that you had a policy document, what that would speak to and or clarify?
I'm a little, this is Michael from Johnstown Millikan. I'm a little embarrassed to say I don't know. When the second charter school, when they were in the process of being approved, that was quite a traumatic experience for everyone involved. That was before I came to the district, so I don't actually know what, if we have an established policy for this or not. So that would definitely be something I'll need to check into.
Great, thank you so much for that feedback, Michael, and totally fine that you're unsure. And Alex, I see that you've come off mute, so I
was just going to say many districts have adopted a standard district policy that CASB, the Colorado Association of School Boards, put out about, I think they put it out about 20 years ago. And if you don't know of one, your district's probably one of the ones that adopted it sort of as CASB wrote it. And we can talk about this in more detail later, but I strongly encourage districts to revisit it, because what CASB wrote is sort of the legal minimum, and it sort of commits the district to, do a process that does exactly what the statute says, but doesn't give you any other sort of leverage to do best practices or other things. So, and CACSA is interested. We've been working with districts before on trying to create a new version of it, but we'll have some work trying to convince CASB that they actually need to reflect best practices instead of minimal practices.
Great, thanks for that, Alex. Yes, best practices versus minimal practices is certainly a key thing to highlight. So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and move on to our next topic, which is finances. So charter schools in Colorado are funded similarly to traditional public schools, and that's based on the Public School Finance Act of 1994. Within this act is a formula that was created to determine funding amounts for all of the 178 school districts in the state, in addition to CSI schools as well. The funding for each district varies greatly, and that's largely due in part to the differences in tax bases and revenues and collected using mill levies. While we won't go into a lot of detail on charter school funding in this session, we do note that charter schools do not always collect funds from mill levies. That varies by district. And this does result in inequitable funding for charter schools. Charter schools are also required to comply with all financial and budget rules. And they also need to complete an annual audit, as we've referenced a few times. So charters are responsible for maintaining their own budget, which includes preparing the budget and actually executing and operating the budget. And as authorizers, you should make sure to include information in a charter school's contract that specifies which services may be provided and charged for by the district, as well as any details regarding facilities. So our next topic is on equity in and access. There are many aspects of Colorado's charter school law that speak to this topic. First, there's a specific section of the law that states that charters may work with the district in developing a transportation plan. Charter schools are not required to offer transportation to students. However, many schools do ensure that this is not a barrier to enrollment for the students that attend their schools. The law does require charter schools to provide access to services for students with disabilities, and this is a state and federal law requirement as well. And this will be discussed again in subsequent sessions as we move forward throughout the boot camp. Finally, charter schools must ensure that their enrollment practices are non-discriminatory, and also that they do not create any undue barriers for enrollment, such as requiring testing for admission, asking about students' special education status, or requiring parental involvement. So we've covered several areas now of Colorado's Charter School Act that impact authorizing work. However, there are additional state and federal laws that we also want to discuss and that are crucial to your work. In looking at the time, I think I'm gonna turn it back over to my colleague, Kelly. But as she noted earlier, you will have access to these slides and the remaining topics that we plan to cover, such as students with disabilities and English language learners and services schools provide to them. It will be available to you, and we'll also cover those in additional detail in subsequent sessions.
Absolutely. Thanks, Lauren. Like we said, it's a lot of information we're trying to pack into a short amount of time. So we're going to go over this topic in a whole separate session on students with disabilities and English learners, because there's a lot of information regarding authorizers' responsibilities on that topic. There's also a slide here on the Colorado Code of Regulations that could be helpful to review. But we're going to go back to those questions that we talked about from the top to see if you found the answers to them and if your answers have changed at all. So Kathy's going to launch that same poll again, but let's review these 3 questions. And if you want to change your answers now's the time to do it. So again, number 1, is there a cap on the number of charter schools allowed to open in Colorado? True or false? Number 2, districts never allow a charter applicant to apply to CSI when they have exclusive chartering authority. And number 3, charter schools are funded in the same manner. Again, take your best guess. We don't know who's who, so it's okay if you still get it wrong. Great, and it looks like we've got 100% answered. So number 1, most of you got this one correct. False, there is there is no cap on the number of charter schools allowed to open in the state. Some states do have a cap, but Colorado is not one of them. Number 2 is also false. A district may release a school to apply to CSI even if they have exclusive chartering authority. And number 3 is partially false. Charter schools do receive funding based on per pupil funding, just like traditional public schools. But like Lauren mentioned, some may not receive the same amount of total funding if mill levy funds are not shared with charters in that district. So we're going to still recognize that we told you you're going to have a break, and we will give you that break even though we went a little bit over time. During this break, if there's questions that came up that you wanted to ask, drop those in the chat right now so we can take a look at them during this break. But we'll give you still a 10-minute break right now. So if you want to go grab something to eat or take a quick break, let's take 10 minutes and then we'll come back together for our next session on the mission and vision and the importance of setting one in Colorado. So feel free to turn your cameras off during this break if you would like, but we'll see you back in 10 minutes.
Opportunity to maybe get up and stretch or grab some water or some food. There's really no easy way to cover the sort of cornerstones of authorizing work. One, of course, of which is the legal basis, the law. And I thought Alex put in a note in the chat that's worthy of just underscoring, which is saving a tab on your browser that brings you to the sections of statute that really undergird your work. I know from my perspective, when I first arrived at an authorizing office that was, in the work of authorizing and working on some of the processes, I noticed that there was sort of a disconnect with the law in some ways, and frankly, I ordered the law books and just kept them dog-eared, and continued to go back to the statute. So great overview. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you to the team. Great overview of the statutes. And if that is one cornerstone, then we want to talk about another cornerstone here in practice, which is around developing a mission and vision, and how a mission and vision for you as an authorizer can be helpful and supportive to you. We had spent we've done quite a bit of homework looking into the Colorado nuance and also recognized your own set of principles and standards of which we will discuss in the next presentation more fully. But suffice to say that your principles and standards do describe a set of beliefs and responsibilities, core responsibilities that authorizers should hold in order to meet the quality authorizing criteria. And those beliefs that are expressed in the principles and standards, in your principles and standards, are grounded in a common understanding that we are all in this work, kind of governed by a common mission. But really, what is that sort of mission? In this session, we're going to go a bit deeper into the mission and vision of the districts that you're all coming from, and talk about how you might be looking into developing a mission and vision for your authorizing office. So let's talk a bit about the agenda. Pretty straightforward. Setting a mission and vision. Why? Like, why would we want to do this? We're going to talk about some examples from Colorado and kind of lean on you to sort of weigh in a little bit with your experiences, and then we'll talk a bit about next steps. Certainly our hope at the end of this session that you'll have a deeper understanding of the value that a mission and vision would bring to your team and to the work that you do in your authorizing office. And we'll spend some time looking at that. We also hope that you'll have some understanding of some steps that you could take to develop an authorizing specific mission and vision based on the mission of your district. I'm just going to push pause there and say that there's lots of shades of gray here when we're talking about a mission and vision. There's certainly like capital V vision, capital M mission that your district board has adopted. And there might be a mission and vision that you adopt and that your board adopts specifically for your authorizing work. There could also be a mission and vision that your team rallies around, that not necessarily elevates to the level of your board adopting. And we're going to talk through one of those, an example of what that might look like a bit later. But important to sort of know that when we're talking about a mission and vision, and we're talking about your district's mission and vision, we're referencing the formal sort of adopted, board adopted mission and vision. But I also want to leave some room for you and your team developing a mission and vision that may not elevate to your board for a variety of reasons, but would animate the work that you do. Okay, so let's start by talking about the why. You know, why establish a mission and vision for authorizing? And we're going to dig into this question. Setting a mission and vision is common, right? It's common for your districts. It's common for schools. It's common in the nonprofit world. It's common in a corporate setting. It's very common. But let's, you know, come off mute and let's have just a quick kind of whip around. There's essentially 3 questions here on this slide. You know, from your perspective, why is it important to set a mission and vision for your work? Kind of regardless of where you work, why is it important? Who might be involved or who should be involved in the process of setting a mission and vision for an organization? And how does having an established mission and vision impact the work that you do? Anybody want to come off mute and talk about, address any one of those 3 questions?
Hi, this is Michael. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Stacy.
Oh, no, you're fine. Go ahead, Michael.
I was just going to say that, you know, how I think about that, you know, who would establish the mission and vision would probably be, you know, the board and working with the superintendent to establish that. And why it's important, I mean, that really kind of sets the direction for the entire organization. You know, it's really kind of the marching orders for everyone in what, you know, and what the district's going to be doing from my perspective.
Stacy?
So just to be clear, are we talking about, and maybe I missed this in my movement, I had to move from downstairs to upstairs, but we're talking about the mission and vision of each individual charter school or the entire district as a whole? The entire district as a whole?
No, good question. So this would be relating to your authorizing work. So Michael had referenced the mission and vision, and Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, for your district. Your district's mission and vision, fantastic. And Stacy, if you want to speak to, you know, to that type of a mission and vision, great. If you want to pull that down a layer and talk about why a mission and vision might be important for your authorizing office as a subset of your district, you can speak to that as well.
Sure. Yeah, I think that you know, just as important as they are for charter schools to maintain and ground in what it is that's important to them and what drives them every day, we as authorizers should be sort of not like, Merlin, should not be like super focused on it, but really have an end game for what we want to do as authorizers, support and evaluation, renewal, and all those things, and how to execute those very important parts of it.
I'm happy to jump in with the school district. It doesn't have a mission and vision, and that kind of struck me at one of the events that we were at, I think last week, when we were talking about what to do when schools fail. But I was thinking about the fact that not having that mission and vision, it makes it much more challenging to have conversations between district departments and schools, because you don't have a common ground to even begin the conversation. And that's been a significant challenge for us, because we are not all in agreement on what the charters really mean for the kids in our school district. And so for me and my work, I really feel like that's something that's lacking. Our authorizing department is 5% of my job currently, and that's it. So it's a little hard to just sort of haphazardly respond to situations without having that driving mission, vision, or value attached to those types of decisions in the work that I do.
Mhm. There's a few comments in the chat. Jody, I apologize. I'll go to the chat.
No, it's okay. I really want to piggyback off of what you just said, Kinlan. And I hope I pronounced your name correctly. I apologize if I didn't. I think that as landscapes are ever shifting in any organization, and especially in education, having that mission and vision as sort of your true north allows you to engage with new decisions or new policies that get made and ask yourself as an organization, does this align with our mission and vision, which would help guide how you engage with that new policy.
Mm-hmm. Tina?
Yeah, I wanted to jump in and just talk a little bit. You're gonna have to going to piggyback on everybody else's, but I think, you know, the why, I think we've set the course for that. It is so that your ideology and philosophy is out there and articulated. I think for current charters, prospective charters, charter families, the community, the rest of the district that may be wondering why we have all these charter schools that keep popping up, right? To really understand that a group of people thoughtfully and intentionally came together to create this mission and vision as a driving framework for the work that around authorizing, managing, supporting charter schools. I think who needs to be involved in setting a mission and vision for the authorizer office, I think, you know, you need to think of all your stakeholders because it will impact a broad group of people, and people are very curious. We have 40% of our students in D49 are in charter schools. That's a large percentage, and it does impact the non-charters in the district, even though there's all sorts of and sometimes mysticism around our charter schools. So to make that more explicit, I think it is important so they don't question funding and they don't question resources and how that all transpires. So I think all the stakeholders and partnerships and businesses need to be involved. It can't be an isolated few from the authorizer's office and maybe a couple charter leaders. School board needs to be involved. They need to understand. Again, Alex mentioned in the chat, and I was thinking the same thing, that as you need something that isn't going to be transient, you need something that is going to be meaningful over time. And I think, again, it shapes your work, and it also helps you provide a frame of reference when you're questioning some of your behaviors or your supports or where you're putting your time and energy to say, does this go with our mission and vision? And I know we don't have anything necessarily articulated right now. We've discussed it again and again about what is our mission and vision, because the work looks so different from authorizers, district to district, you know, across even just this state. I found, and it is interesting, and it is driven by your ideology and philosophy.
Thank you, Tina. It looks like Alex, you've got a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to tell a story. When I was first at NACSA, I directed their research and evaluation. And before they adopted the 12 essential practices, NACSA had Mackie Raymond look at a huge data set of school performance and authorizing practices. And the biggest correlation to improved performance of the portfolio were the authorizers that had a mission and vision specific to their authorizing work. It was like twice as big as the next biggest indicator. Now, the direction is really interesting because I think non-district authorizers pretty much almost always have pretty strong mission statements and they're directed to the mission and purpose, whereas districts don't do it. So that's part of the correlation thing. But if we can take from the non-district authorizers, this is one of the things districts should greedily steal, I think.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. And Alex mentioned the 12 essential practices. And in fact, you know, our discussion recognizing the importance of a mission and vision is reflected in the 12 essential practices. If you haven't heard of them, there are 12 essential practices that NACSA has looked at, largely, you know, building off the work that Alex did some years ago. The the first of these essential practices is, in fact, establishing a mission. So under the 12 essential practices, all authorizers should have a published and available mission for quality authorizing. So the, whoops, did I go the wrong way? No, I went the right way. Sorry. CACSA discusses this in more detail and provides a rationale for having an established mission for an authorizing office. There are a few here of the reasons or rationale for the importance of establishing a mission. What we had discussed, very similar, it provides the why. No matter what district you're coming from, political party you're aligned to Alex's point, post-election day, we're all at the table because we believe in something. We believe in, all children should have the opportunities in life that come from excellent education, whatever that might be. It does provide your why, as we discussed. Also, as we discussed, and it's sort of bears out in CACSA's work, it provides the North Star. It provides that sort of directional, long-term point in the sky for which we're all striving over the course of time to achieve. And then it's also a communications piece. It allows you to publish a mission, and it communicates your sort of core purpose, your core principles. I'd have to say, just in my experience, and maybe this is sort of similar to Alex's story, I demoted the importance of a mission and vision because they were so widely adopted and so poorly followed in my personal professional experience. It was just like, okay, we need a mission and vision, fine. Okay, checkbox, go. But as the work became more complicated, and as the sort of C's became more churned up over time, as we instituted more quality provisions, which means making difficult decisions on, who's approved or which schools, our annual reports and how rigorous our assessments were, suddenly we revisited our mission and vision, and it became the ballast for our work, much to the experiences that you all shared and the reasons why establishing a mission and vision were so important. It became a very critical aspect of our work. And we were fortunate to have a board that we could work with to establish a formal mission and vision, a capital M, capital V mission and vision in policy. Okay, we're going to look at some of the established mission statements from some Colorado authorizers. And I will just point out that a couple of the folks who we had planned on speaking aren't here, but we do have a team from DPS. So I'd love to have you, just put you in the sort of batting box. I'd love to have you share to the extent that you can share a little bit when we talk about DPS's mission and vision. And it's my understanding after talking with Max that your district obviously has the mission and vision that is the umbrella for all of your district work, including your authorizing work and your portfolio work. But I also understand that you have sort of a compelling purpose, or a statement around sort of that establishes a compelling purpose. And oh, Max, you're here. I apologize, Max. I didn't see you.
Oh, you're good.
Rather than having me bumble through what I thought you might talk about, Max, I'll just pose a few questions to you. Let's start with the first two. What's the mission of your district, and how does this mission impact the mission of your authorizing office and your work?
Well, I'll first start by saying there's a lot of other talented DPS portfolio folks on this call, so welcome them to join in and add in their own thoughts as well. I do have, might be easier for people to be able to read this more than anything. I think that document should be open for anyone to see, but that includes both. We're traveling back a few years now to when Superintendent Cordova first was leading a superintendent in DPS. And she, at that time, established the district vision based in breaking historical patterns of inequity so that our students thrive not by accident, but by design. You can see the rest of that language here. But our team, and actually all teams in DPS at the time, took it upon ourselves to ground the work that we do in that broader district vision. So you can see then below this, this is Portfolio's most recent compelling purpose. But again, this is from, we last looked at this September 2020. A lot of things have changed since then. So I think we are still trying to reorient and think about what our purpose is. And for example, Jody put in the chat one of our prior missions from just a little bit while longer ago. Our website has not been updated particularly recently. But I think would just highlight for everyone that, you know, we start with the goal of breaking historical patterns of inequity, but then grounded specifically in that work of family of schools model that DPS embraces. So you can see that authorizing work represented in terms of our recommendations that we're making to the Board of Education. You can also see it in terms of how we are partnering with the district to ensure that both charter schools, innovation zone schools, innovation schools are considered in terms of policies and practices of the district. You can see how we're ensuring that our role as the accountability partner shows up in that compelling purpose. And then further, just how we're advocating to ensure that schools continue to have as much school-based decision-making as possible. So I don't know that that necessarily answered your questions there, Steve, but just sort of to share how we started from a broader district vision and then put that in terms of our day-to-day work.
No, Max, it's great. Can you give us some examples about how so the way I understand it, you kind of nested your authorizing team's compelling purpose within the district's overarching vision and mission. Fantastic. Can you maybe share a little bit about, like, what does this look like in practice? Like, how, you know, do you come back to this in a meeting, you know, or when do you resurface your compelling purpose and in sort of practical ways for your authorizing team or your portfolio team?
Yeah, so I think I can speak to the ways that we aspired to do it and then maybe can also speak to the challenges we had in doing that. But, you know, soon after creating sort of this compelling purpose, we tried to regularly, you know, every full team meeting, this was on our first slide, making sure folks had the opportunity to remind ourselves, like, what is supposed to be driving our work? Are these things that we are succeeding in right now? And, you know, at each meeting, doing our best to reflect, say, on one particular area, if we could. I think, you know, that approach and structure we were able to hold on to probably for a few months, and then, you know, DPS has continued to go through transition since then. So I think something we have talked about is whether this is still our compelling purpose or if there are new, you know, areas that would change now. So I think it is really important that it's a living document and something you revisit, both to make meaning of it, but to update it as things may change. And I don't know if anyone else from DPS has any thoughts to share on sort of, I can't even remember if we've looked at this for recently. All right, I'm seeing Jody shaking her head, so there you go.
I don't think we've looked at it recently, and I think this is, we've, you know, as Max alluded to earlier, our particular department has shifted in its positioning within other teams. So then we've looked at developing another mission and vision statement for, you know, kind of the larger office, which is one of the things that always drives me a little bit crazy, is when we're constantly reinventing mission and vision statements. And I think that's one of the pitfalls of large organizations as well.
Totally agree.
You got some nods on that, Jody, about the reinvention of the mission and vision consistently. Mm-hmm.
I will add one thing, and maybe this will be helpful in DPS, but in other places. But I do, when I counsel a new authorizer, I often emphasize the need to sort of offer training to the DAC and to the school board so they understand how the process goes. And I think of these mission statements at the district levels as something to be useful when you're training the other stakeholders that participate in authorizing with you. And often they're the ones with more power and more authority than you on the staff. And if they had a little bit of grounding, then they can discipline themselves a little bit. Say, oh no, it's not the way we do things here. We have a big focus on equity, and we ask a lot about merit and data, that kind of stuff. So it's a defensive strategy from the politics blowing up your work.
That's a great point.
Thank you for sharing, and appreciate the sort of the practical challenges, right, in the day-to-day work and doing this, and appreciate your honesty and humility in presenting how this mission and vision and your compelling purpose interacts with day-to-day work.
Happy to.
So thank you.
Hey, can I ask one last question before we go?
Yep.
Max, did your board, you didn't ask your board to approve yours. This is sort of an internal staff tool, right?
Internal staff tool. I believe the vision from Superintendent Cordova, I don't know that was board approval, but certainly got board presentation.
Good. So you don't have to wait for your board to approve something before you can begin establishing a mission and vision. Okay, let's we're gonna have an example from Aurora. I'll just quickly say that we pulled an example. So you're not alone. Obviously, this is something as Alex mentioned, and as the Essential 12 practices across the nation. We just have an example in the slide deck if you want to revisit it for Hillsborough out of Florida for their specific charter office. So this is an example of a charter office approved formal mission and vision within the Hillsborough County Public School System. That's there. And then why don't we go ahead and I'll set up this small group discussion and we can break out and go into it. We'll move into smaller groups to discuss how your district and your own district and how a mission and vision of your district impacts your work. Kathy will launch us into breakout groups for Kathy. Why don't we do about 6 minutes, just looking at time. And then you've got some discussion prompts there. Like first thing, your district's established mission. Second, whether or not your authorizing office has one. But some questions to consider in light of that is, how should the mission of the district align with the mission of your authorizing office? Should they be similar? Should they be different? What's the why of your work? How can your mission serve as your North Star? And what stakeholders should be involved in establishing your mission? Or if you're going to resurface your mission, who should be involved in that resurfacing? So we'll do about, let's go 5 minutes. That should be, I think, plenty of time for our discussion. Kathy.
Okay. I'm opening the rooms.
Looks like Max.
Max, do you want to go into a room?
I'm good. I'm going to jump out for a little bit, but try and come back for the last discussion around authorizing principles.
Okay.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
And Robin, I know we need to make up a little bit of time. Welcome back. Apologize for any Zoom whiplash that folks may have experienced as you got pulled out of your rooms. Let's do kind of a quick share out. And Lauren, I'll begin with you. Any particular headlines that you want to emphasize, or somebody on your team, where you maybe you want to point out somebody in your room to talk about a particular headline?
Yes, thanks, Steve. We talked a lot about aligning the district mission to signal to schools and families what is significant for the district, what they're taking seriously. For example, planning around equity issues, serving students with different needs, and using the mission or vision to say at the district level, like, here's what we take seriously. So I found that interesting, and I will open it up to anyone who was in our group if they want to share any additional feedback. And also apologize for getting cut off mid-sentence. Anyone from my group have key takeaways that they wanted to highlight, or additional key takeaways, I should say?
Sorry, I don't want to over share, but Tina, I really appreciated your counterpoint when we had this conversation. I certainly don't want to put you on the spot, but because it was, a little bit different than sort of some of the typical things that we might hear, are you interested in sharing?
Yeah, I mean, one, I guess probably right out of the gate, I do like to present a different viewpoint. I think obviously, wouldn't it be nice if we all were alignment? And I think we're all thinking always about trying to get things in alignment. But I think when being particularly in D49, which has innovation zones, very extremely, even within those zones, independent schools, and certainly our charter schools and our other choice schools that are district run, all are extremely different students serving different populations. I wouldn't say that they operate out of the district mission and vision, but to say that you're going to run an autonomous school, whether it's charter or non-charter, and then say that you want it to be aligned seems like, why bother? Why bother being an autonomous school? Why bother creating a charter atmosphere for uniqueness? And I think there's people who live and attend our schools that actually don't agree with the district's mission and vision. And thus that is why they choose our charters, because they don't have to drive their kid halfway across town to do so. There are schools within this boundary that don't align with the district. And I think that is what they want, and their child is well served there. So just presenting perhaps a little different picture. I've come also from very rigid top-down districts, not saying that just alignment means that it's rigid top-down, but where everyone's speaking this and walking the talk. And I think there can be benefits, and that's the beauty of choice, I suppose.
Thanks so much, Jody and Tina, for jumping in there. Steve, back to you.
Yeah, thank you. Kelly.
Yeah, our conversation, first kind of started out with just the differences in the size of what is the authorizing office at the district. I had a couple folks in our room who their office might be an office of 1 or 2 people compared to others where you've got a much bigger team. And the different challenges that come with that when it is a smaller team. And then we started to get into the same conversation, Tina, that you're kind of talking about, of the flexibilities that are given to charter schools and how that should be reflected in your own authorizing mission and vision. And how, like Tina said, charter schools are unique for a reason, and to ensure that that part of their uniqueness fits within your own authorizing mission. And then anyone from my group as well, feel free to jump in if you have other thoughts.
That looks good. Alex, I don't want to speak for you, but it seems like the comment that you have in the chat is one to suggest that an authorizer can carry a mission and a vision that strives to create an environment within which these independent schools, autonomous schools, can then flourish to a high standard within compliant parameters, et cetera. Is that sort of what you're suggesting there?
Yeah, I do want to distinguish between trying to, I think all the charter schools should be pretty mission focused themselves and have the vision of what they're trying to do. And totally agree with Tina that we're not trying to make them be generic and standardized. We want a mission for our own work in the authorizing shop. We try to want to influence the district. And I think we need to signal to the schools, the authorizers' priorities, but the schools are the ones who are picking their mission and vision. And implementing it. And we don't want those to become common or Melbatos because we're all trying to water down to beat each other's one sentence.
Mm-hmm. Yet it is our vision that all of the schools of choice are of high quality, are innovative labs. Like you could add that layer to it as well, right?
Yeah, and at the same time, when equity issues and serving all kids is a is a big important role. We need to make sure that is still accomplished within the charter sector, within the district, or general. So it's not giving up on things that you prioritize, but it's honoring different approaches, and they can be different and still be good.
Mm-hmm. They can really span from being sort of system level mission and vision about how we conduct our authorizing practices to very specific missions and visions, to a very specific mission and vision based upon a particular board's direction that could exist as well. That's a great point. Good discussion. Fantastic discussion. Okay. No doubt that there's a reason why it's one of the 12 essential practices, and the reason why we felt, and with obviously Alex's input, the design of this as we're sort of lay these foundation stones to build upon over the course of this boot camp. In addition to the legal foundation, we then talk about sort of our mission and vision, our why foundation. Here are some resources that you could certainly go to. They're CACSA resources that have some good examples for the essential practices and that you can read on your own time. So with that, any other questions, reactions, or ideas for the good of the order before I hand it off to Robin and we move into the principles and standards?
I guess I just have one, and
Yeah.
this is coming up with 27J. We're getting ready to look at our 4th National Heritage Academy school. And I was thinking, one of the things that we like about charter schools is that we do want to provide a unique opportunity for kids to learn in a different way. Part of our mission is to ensure that every student has takes control of their future. And so we talk about every and providing that opportunity for every. But I think if we would have a really solid mission and vision that included and our authorizing mission and vision, this idea that we were looking for unique, perhaps that would, I don't know, potentially curtail some of the non-unique applicants from coming into the district, right? Like I wonder about that, and give us an opportunity to look at a wide variety of different options for kids instead of the same cookie cutter approach, which we seem to be getting from National Heritage Academies.
I think you're raising an important point, and even as much as a communications function, your mission and vision, sending a clear signal to the field about what you're interested in and why you exist and what you're interested in approving. That could also be useful. Thank you, Kinlan. Okay, seeing nothing further, Robin, I'm going to hand the microphone to you.
Thanks so much, Steve. Let's see. Okay, sorry about that. Just switched my setup, so getting it situated. So now we're going to talk about the Colorado standards for quality charter school authorizing. And today so far, we've talked about 2 really important foundations that guide your work as an authorizer. And so one is statute. Of course, statute always guides everything that you do. And the other is your mission and vision, which can be your North Star, your unifying purpose to guide your authorizing practice. And then the standards and principles for charter school authorizing are another foundational document that can guide your work because they incorporate national best practices in charter school authorizing. And so we're going to talk about the background and purpose of the Colorado Standards for Charter Authorizers. We're going to talk about the 3 core principles that undergird all of the standards. We'll talk about the standards themselves, and then we probably won't have time for questions and answers. But our objective is really for you to just begin to understand how you might use the Colorado principles and standards in your authorizing practice. So the foundation for the Colorado Principles and Standards is really the NACSA Principles and Standards. NACSA, or the National Association of Charter School Authorizers, is an organization that does research, advocacy, and provides support to authorizers to advance smart charter school growth and oversight. If you haven't taken a look at NACSA, they do provide a lot of great resources on their website. They serve as a really helpful resource for authorizers. And so as part of their work, they've developed the NACSA Principles and Standards for Quality Charter School Authorizing. And this was developed in 2004, and it still serves as a resource that guides authorizing practices. And it was a foundational document in developing the Colorado Principles and Standards. And NACSA is actually engaged in updating those standards right now to incorporate a focus on community-based authorizing. So in 2012, the Colorado State Board of Education passed the standards for charter schools and charter school authorizers, which is 1 CCR 301-88. And that's the Colorado Department of Education standards for charter school authorizers. They align with the NACSA Principles and Standards, as we already mentioned. And today we're going to start taking a look at some of the principles and standards in that document. First, it's important to understand that the principles and standards are not intended to be a list. They're intended to be a roadmap or a guiding document that undergird your authorizing practices. And they provide practical guidance to help you carry out your work. So let's start with the 3 core principles of charter authorizing in Colorado. So the principles are a set of beliefs about quality charter school authorizing, and they are incorporated into each of the standards. The first principle is to maintain high standards. And so it's important that a quality authorizer sets high standards and maintains high standards throughout the charter life cycle, through every phase of the charter life cycle. So they set high standards for approving charter applications. They maintain high standards during their oversight process. They are overseeing charter schools and making sure that they meet performance standards and targets. And if they're not meeting performance standards and targets, they're actually taking action or letting the school know, pointing out areas of deficiency. And then they're closing schools that they need to close, schools that are not meeting standards and that are not, and targets, and that are not following state regulations and laws. The second core principle is to uphold school autonomy. So a quality authorizer makes sure that the charter schools have the autonomy that they need to implement their programs effectively. You know, as I'm sure you all know, one of the core principles of charter schools is that they have the autonomy to implement their programs and their instructional practice the way they need to. And in exchange, they're being held accountable for their performance rather than their instructional practices, for instance. And so they have autonomy in their governing board, in their personnel. They have autonomy to hire the staff that they need, in developing their own vision and culture, designing their own instruction. Of course, they're committing to their model in their application, but then they have the autonomy to implement that model. And another important point of upholding school autonomy is to make sure that you're minimizing administrative and compliance burdens on schools, so that they're not having to spend a lot of time on compliance rather than on implementing effective programs for students. Finally, the third principle of quality authorizing is to protect student and public interests. I think that one is pretty clear. We're in this work for students, and they should remain top of mind in all authorizing practices. And that includes making sure that schools are following conflicts of interest policies, that they're effective stewards of public funds, that they are providing access to all students, including students with disabilities, English learners. They don't have admissions criteria. And they're making sure that parents and students are well informed about the quality of education being provided by charter schools and what their charter school options are. So those are all of the principles. And now we're going to take a few minutes to talk about the standards. And so the principles articulate a set of beliefs about authorizing, but the standards identify the core responsibilities of authorizing. And then they talk about how to uphold each of the principles within each of these responsibilities. So these are basically the core areas of authorizing. And we're going to go into each of these areas in more depth later in the boot camp. So we'll just kind of touch on them pretty quickly so that we can hopefully get to a conversation with Max Sweden about how he implements these principles in practice. So the first standard is about agency commitment and capacity. And that means that the authorizer should recognize that chartering is a means to foster excellent schools. This standard is also about setting up good internal structures and organizational structures to make sure that you're able to do the work of authorizing. So making sure that you have the human and financial resources to do the work of authorizing. And I know for many of you, that's a challenge. You may have one person in your office, but it's just thinking about how you can best utilize the people that you have, the resources that you have, folks in other district offices to make sure that you're implementing authorizing practices effectively. The second standard focuses on the application process and decision-making. The idea of this standard is that a quality authorizer has a comprehensive application process, which includes providing really clear information and guidance to potential applicants about how they can apply, what is the process, and then also that they follow a fair and transparent procedure and process for the application, for reviewing the application, and that they adhere to rigorous approval criteria. So I think actually, since we have 4 minutes left, I'm just going to briefly run through all of the standards. We're going to talk about them later in boot camp. And instead, we're going to get to Max and ask him a couple of questions about how he implements the principles in his practice. So standard 3 is about performance contracting. Standard 4 is about ongoing oversight and evaluation. And standard 5 focuses on revocation and renewal decision-making. And again, we have sessions on all of these aspects of the standards coming up. And so we're now going to have the opportunity to talk to Max about how he implements these principles. Thanks so much for joining us again. So I'm wondering if you can think of a time when you faced a challenge and it was helpful to think about one of the 3 core principles to guide you in addressing that challenge. And so the 3 core principles are maintaining high standards, upholding school autonomy, and then protecting student and public interests.
Sorry, I'll start by saying I think I misunderstood which day we were doing this on, so I'm not particularly prepared for this. So my apologies. I thought this was next week.
Oh, no problem.
So, I think off the cuff, I think I can speak to I'm just looking at our 3 right here.
Or if anybody, how about this? Does anybody else have any thoughts or reactions to any of these principles and how they might guide you in your work as an authorizer? Just go ahead and unmute yourself and jump in.
Happy to jump in because I'm digging around on the resource that you shared with us. And one of the principles around ongoing oversight and evaluation I just really love the language. Oh, I didn't realize my camera was off, sorry. Really love the language around ensuring legally entitled autonomy, but also helping schools to maintain high standards, student outcomes, and inform renewal decisions. And I think that is really sort of that sweet spot, that groove that informs my role as a school support person for charters, to make sure that preemptively those schools have everything they need to be set up for success, not just for their community outcomes, but also for our authorizing practices.
Great, thank you. That's a really helpful point about balancing how you're holding schools accountable with making sure that they have the autonomy that they need to be successful. And then Alex shares that APS and Doug Ho have both done serious reviews of everything they ask of charter schools and work to reduce the reporting burden. So that certainly aligns with that principle of autonomy. And since we have about 2 minutes left, I'm actually going to close it out here. We would really appreciate if you can fill out our end of day survey. Thanks so much for spending the time with us. We hope this provided a helpful foundation and start to the rest of our boot camp. Again, we're gonna dig into many of these topics in greater depth in future sessions, but hopefully this at least gets us started. So Kathy, if you can go ahead and launch the end of day survey.
Yes, it's in the chat.
Oh, you put the link in the chat. We would really appreciate your taking a minute to fill that out. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks, everybody.